Mozambique, Monicole, Diablo, Monara, Mozambique, Monicole, Diablo, Mona, and then Mozambique, Monicole, Diablo, Monara, Mozambique, Monicole, Diablo, Mona, and then Yagregala, Nale Kojudashi. Amine Yashisala, Ushia Odrona de Gai, Mozamando, Monica, no one other baby, Mozamando, Monica, Diablo,
Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon to you all, and good evening who are in Africa watching us live. Today isn't political affairs. Today it's all about Black resistance, and we are in the Black History Month season. Today we have a special show, and it's the Black History Month celebration. Today we want to honor the resilience of the Black community. It's important to recognize the significant roles that the Black people have played, the ongoing struggle for justice and equality and freedom. For the early days of slavery to the civil rights movement and beyond, Black people have engaged in various forms of resistance to resist oppression and discrimination. The Black resistance movement has been a vital force in the advancement of Black people and the worldwide fight for social justice. Throughout history, Black people have employed various tactics of resistance, including protest, boycott, sit-in strikes, and civil disobedience. These acts of resistance were often met with violence, brutality, and even death. But they are nevertheless persistent in their pursuit for freedom and justice. The resistance of Black people have taken many forms over these years and is being led by great people like Harriet Tubman, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Malcolm X, and our own big brother, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King. Their tireless effort and sacrifice have paved the way for us to see this good process that we're seeing today. Today, we are blessed and fortunate to have another big giant in this country. She's called Dr. Tasha Dubry Wilson, and she's not a stranger on the studio. Last year, we had her during our Black History Month celebration. She came in and took us through some details about how Black brothers and sisters got themselves into the media, radio, etc., etc. But today, she's going to take us through the resistance, Black resistance. And before I read her bio, I would like to say a hello to her. Sister, Madam, Dr. Keisha.
Hello, how are you?
We are fine. And how are you also doing?
I am good. I can't complain.
Yeah, today's a Saturday and I've taken you away from the family. But before you take us through, I want to introduce Sister Dr. Wilson to you. But before, let me just read her bio. Dr. Wilson is an assistant professor of history and African American study No, Dr. Wilson is an assistant professor of history and African American studies at Coppin State University. She is a native of Philadelphia, PA, and received her BA in history from Howard University. Dr. Wilson went on to obtain her law degree from Northwestern California University School of Law. Her law school trialed an appellate advocate thesis entitled Race, Gender, Jury Nullification in the Criminal Justice System, which examined the disparity against African Americans in conviction and sentencing in the United States court system. Although Dr. Wilson spent many years in the field of law, she recognized that her professional calling was tied to her passion for history. She went on to earn her MA and PhD in history from Morgan State University in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Wilson currently serves as a commissioner for the Maryland Lynching Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which is dedicated to researching cases of racial motivated lynching in the state's history. She was also an advisory board member and lead historian for the Underground Railroad exhibit at the B&Q Railroad Museum in Baltimore, Maryland. Dr. Wilson is a proud member of Phi Alpha Theta National History Honor Society, the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, Phi Delta Phi International Law Fraternity, and Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. Dr. Wilson also currently publishing includes Killing Dizzy, the NACP, the Black Press, the Crusade to the End Black Caricature Culture in Hollywood 1950 to 1969. Phonics Type Prometheus Colorism, oh, doctor, this thing, and intersectional discrimination among blacks in the United States and in Brazil since 1929 to 1988. And the evolution of African American radio for Oxford University Journal of American History. Doc, you are welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's my
Your
honor.
bios like this. Wow, wow. And I know next year you're going to give me more bios
I
because
hope so, God willing.
is that we want our sisters to continue to excel beyond the measures. All right. Doc, today, Black History Month.
Yes.
And I know you have a slide for us and you're going to take us through, you're going to take us all through some of the resistance. I understand there's been thousands of resistance. People believe that when the Europeans came down to Africa and we were just dumb people. That's what they believed. But little did they know that we were military men, we were carpenters, we were builders, we were intellectuals. History doesn't talk much about us. The
Right.
history just says that, they came, loot us all, put it in the boat, and then shipped us down in Virginia. Doctor, take us through. What happened?
Okay. So I'm going to share my screen.
Right.
Are you able to see the PowerPoint?
Yes, just give me a minute.
Hmm.
Yes, we have the PowerPoint.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to go through the material and we're going to talk about Black resistance.
Right.
But one of the things that I wanted to focus on, because again, this is a solid theme for Black History Month, I wanted to focus on a time period that is often not talked about, which is pre emancipation as it relates to Black resistance.
Right.
Typically, when we say Black resistance, our mind immediately races to 1960s, even the 1950s, talking about the Black Power movement and civil rights movement, which is appropriate because that is, in fact, African American resistance. However, sometimes a lot of us believe that Black people were asleep at the wheel until 1950 and just decided to rise up in that moment, when in reality, there has been resistance in this country as it relates to Black oppression since the first 20 and odd Negroes arrived on the shores of Virginia in 1619. So, those are some of the things that I wanted to highlight with you all today. So I'm going to go ahead and open up my PowerPoint.
Okay.
We're just going to go through the material.
Okay.
So before we talk about resistance, let's talk about what was being resisted. Okay. Chattel slavery as it relates to race. Now, during this time, of course, we're starting in 1619. The
Doctor,
English
can
who,
you hear me?
yes, can you hear me?
Can you enlarge your PowerPoint because we really want
Sure.
to see your PowerPoint?
How's
Right now,
that?
we're just seeing the studio instead. So
Oh,
and yes,
is that good?
I know. I right now you're just showing me the studio. Um,
Okay, let me try to go in again and do it.
Viewers, just bear with us. Doctor's trying to put the PowerPoint back because we want to see everything face to face. All right. Okay.
All right, is that better?
That's right. That's right. That's right.
Perfection, perfection, perfection.
Yes.
All right, so let's do it.
Yes.
So first, let's start off by talking about slavery in the American colonies. Now, this is what was being resisted because you're going to see race and chattel slavery really attack Black freedom. The English who are bringing in enslaved Africans, and you'll typically hear me use the term enslaved versus slaves because these people were not slaves. They were being enslaved
Hmm.
by Europeans, but they were fully developed humans with fully developed lives.
Right.
So the English are going to follow the Spanish and calling Africans Negroes because, as we all know, the Spanish word for Black is negro. Okay. So that is the reason why, as late as the 1950s and 60s, African Americans were called Negroes. Okay. So slaves were legal property, similar in tone to owning a horse or a cow or a pig or even your couch. And during this time, you also had white indentured servants. However, white indentured servants were problematic for individuals who had their own plantations. First of all, if they were white, so if they ran away, they could blend in with the rest of English society. The other part is once they worked off their indentured servitude, typically between 3 and 7 years, they were done, right? When it comes to enslaved Africans, not only are you a slave until the day you die, your children and your children's children are going to be slaves until the day that they die because African heritage is going to become a marker for servitude.
Okay.
Now, what were they growing? What were they producing? So during the beginning of the American colonies, you're going to see these four crops really be the staple of the economy: tobacco, rice, sugar, and cotton. Now, in the beginning, tobacco was really yielding a lot of money. Rice is going to come about as more West Africans are being brought into society because Europeans had no knowledge of how to cultivate rice, okay? That was something that they learned from West Africans. So, really, South Carolina is going to become pretty much center stage for rice cultivation, and this will become white gold.
Okay.
Sugar, the same deal. You're going to see a lot of sugar produced in like the New Orleans, that whole Louisiana region, and then of course cotton is going to take over. As time goes on.
Right. Okay.
Now let's talk about the birth of our country. So slavery existed in this territory prior to the United States becoming a country. So July 4th, 1776 is America's birthday. Now, at the time of defecting and leaving Britain and becoming its own country, you had this population of enslaved Africans that really Congress and our lawmakers didn't know what to do with. So in 1787, they went up to Philly, to construct a constitution that would govern our land. But the problem was there were too many Black people in the South. So
Oh,
what are we going to do about it? We have to reduce their humanity so that they won't have that level of voting power in terms of, congressional influence in the South. So what they're going to come up with is something called the Three-Fifths Compromise, which still is in our Constitution today.
Yeah.
Okay. And that means that African Americans are not fully human. They're only three-fifths of a human. And
Right.
it will take a law, which the 14th Amendment does, to make Black people human in this country. But it took a law to make
So
Black people human.
so sad. So they were trying to depopulate the black people because they wanted to prevent them from voting in the future. That's the reason, right?
Well, no, the problem was they did not want the South
Yeah.
to have more voting power in the Electoral College because, that's based on population, how many electoral votes you get. So people were counting their slaves, as the population. And, the Northerners were saying, well, you can't have it both ways. Either they're human or they're not. So, like, you don't want them to have any rights. You don't want them to be people, but at the
Yeah.
same time, you want to use their numbers so that you can have more influence in the electoral college. And, that's how we pick our presidents. It's
Right.
not based on the popular vote. It's based on the number of electoral votes that you get, during the elections. So yeah, so the humanity of Africans was reduced to three-fifths of a person.
This is sad.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know this. I'm always, when I teach this to my students, they're always shell shocked to know that our governing document, the one that was, crafted in 1787, has Black folks listed as three-fifths of a human. 1793 was an interesting year because we see the advent of the cotton gin. Now, for those of you who don't know, the cotton gin was a machine that pulls seeds out of bales of cotton. Prior to that time, slaves had to sit down and take each seed out of the cotton bale. Okay. Once this machine is invented, it's really going to speed up cotton production. And now that we have more cotton, we need more slaves. So with this invention, you're really going to see the expansion of slavery. But not only that, the institution of slavery, which was already really bad, is going to get really, really, worse if you can imagine. Now I want to show you this chart because this basically tells you how much people are worth during this time. And I've used prime field hands. These are African American men, roughly between the ages of 15 and 35. Those are supposed to be your Superman years, right? When you're, So in Virginia, we'll use the DMV where I am now. Okay, Washington, Maryland, Virginia. In the year 1800, a prime field hand was worth about $350 per person. And you may say, "Oh, that's not a lot of money." I put the asterisk there because I wanted to show you how much that would be worth today. So that's $8,100. Okay, and as time goes on, based on location, you will see how much these enslaved Africans will become worth. Now, I want you to check out, let's look at Alabama, okay, because that's really the hotbed for cotton development, cotton cultivation. And I want you to go to the year 1860, right before the Civil War. One guy is worth $56,300. Now,
Wow.
let's say I have 100 of those guys. That's a lot of money. So for that reason, when people make the statement that, oh no, the Civil War had nothing to do with slavery, I promise you, if you try to go in and take 56,000 times 100 from someone, they're going to go to war with you over their property, over their slaves. Did you have any questions about this chart?
Yeah, I'm just looking at this chart right now, and I'm just imagining how difficult it will be for the slave master to just let these people to go. Because if each person at that time
Mm-hmm.
value was about how much is that in Alabama?
Mm-hmm.
63,000.
That's
In
a lot of money.
about 200 slaves.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely, they wouldn't let them go.
Right. And that's why I always make the point to tell folks that wealthy whites own slaves. Not every person owned slaves. You had to be wealthy, but also, this was their bottom line. This was their property. So one of the things that also led to family separation was the fact that if someone was in debt and they needed a lot of money really quickly, and they had, let's say, a family with four brothers and a mom and a dad, they would sell off each person separately to get more money versus trying to send all 6 of them to the same place as a package deal, because you wouldn't get as much at market for them, which is why a lot of people were separated from their families. And a lot of people did not, they never saw their family members again, or they wouldn't reunite with them until after the Civil War was over, if they were lucky.
Yeah.
Um, you'll see people putting ads in newspapers saying, I was sold away from this farm in Virginia. I'm looking for my mom, and that sort of thing after the war is over.
So, from a historical point of view or from the psychological point of view,
Hmm.
Lincoln's strategy to set the slave free was to break the South financially. It was all about the greens, the dollars.
Right, that, but also the South was about to struggle anyway because, we know supply and demand, the law of supply and demand. They got really greedy and they were making too much cotton. So when you make too much of something, the value of it goes down.
Yeah.
And at one point, 2/3 of the world was getting their cotton from the United States. And I think the South felt as though, okay, well, once the war happens, we'll always have money, because we know Europe is getting cotton from us. But guess what? Europe said, we're not getting involved with you guys. We're going to get our cotton from West Africa. So that's how Europe starved the South. And then to your point, Lincoln is going to not only emancipate slaves in the rebel states, not the entire country, because Maryland, which was a border state, Lincoln did not free slaves in this state, because he didn't want to make the border states mad at him, because he knew if they left the Union, America is over. So you're right. It was all about preserving the Union. It had nothing to do with altruism on the part of Lincoln as it relates to African Americans.
Doctor, this is really sad, but
Mhm.
continue. Tell us more. We want to know more.
So, so when we talk about resistance, we're living in a time period where African American history is under attack because people don't want to talk about what happened. And, it is difficult to talk about, but I always tell people history is not here to make you feel good or to make you feel bad. I mean, it can make you feel good or proud, it can make you feel bad, but its goal is to tell you what happened. And this is what happened. This is what people are resisting. Punishment on plantations was very, very violent. So, again, it's going to induce slaves to perform well because they don't want their backs to end up looking like that. Not only that, the fear of the lash is going to drive slaves to cooperate amongst themselves. Africans are very sophisticated people. So, what they would do if someone was sick, because regardless of whether you're sick, regardless of whether you're 14 years old or 30 years old, if your requirement for the day was to pick 200 pounds of cotton, you were supposed to pick 200 pounds of cotton. So what they would do is get someone that had a lot of energy that would go over 200 and maybe do 250. And then he would take his cotton out of his bag and stuff it in the kids' bags so that no one would get the lash. So they would cooperate to make sure everybody was hitting their 200. But on days where slave children, because your childhood ends as a slave basically around age 12, parents started stuffing their kids' bags with cotton, and they would take the lash in place of their child. Like, I'll take the beating today for my kid because I don't want them hitting my kid. But you also had on the plantation slave drivers. A slave driver is a slave, an enslaved African who is assisting the white overseer. Sometimes the slave drivers were the first to give the lash, and they were just as gung ho as the overseers. And then other times they would work against the overseers and say, oh no, everybody hit their mark today. Nobody was under. So they would lie to protect their fellow slaves. So you had a mixed bag of that. But this is what people wanted to resist. And again, you can't make the argument that Africans were happy living in an environment where your back could end up like this, because the notion of the happy slave, which is something that was really sold to the country at that time, it just did not exist. It didn't.
Yeah, doctor. Um, can you just tell us some of the resistance?
Hmm.
Yeah. Um, I know there are uncountable of them. Can you just, what your memory can recall, let us know some of the resistance and the detail of it. Oh,
Sure. Well, let's start with the most common forms of resistance, right? The easiest one is escape. Not easy in terms of you escaping, but that's the one that is the knee-jerk reaction. I gotta run, right? We even today we use the term fight or flight.
Mm.
Escape was something that a lot of people attempted, but it was very difficult to pull off, unless you had help. And we'll see that help will come in the form of the Underground Railroad. We'll get there in a minute. Also, just outright revolts. We're going to burn this baby down. We're going to attack, our, enslavers. Ship mutinies, very important, because again, Africans didn't just say, okay, yeah, I'm enslaved, I give up. On the boats en route to the Caribbean, Africans were trying to kill and take over the ship to try to return back to their native land. We also had maroon communities, and these were communities of escaped slaves who came together and hid in the hills out of the reach of European encroachment. A lot of times they would be aided by Native Americans to find safe places to hide. There are a lot of maroon communities during this time on the island of Jamaica. Also, sabotage. I'm breaking farm tools. I'm burning down cotton fields in the middle of the night. Nobody knows what happened, and we don't know. Food preparation was very common in terms of sabotage, because a lot of people who were smiling and delivering your dinner to you as a master didn't like you. So you may think that she loves making you food, that older Black woman, but she's putting a little something in your food. And sometimes it could be, urine. It could be her defecating in food, but the goal is to keep you sick. There were some masters who were always sick and they couldn't figure out why. It's because that smiling old lady that you think loves being a slave is poisoning you slowly but surely. Also, faking illnesses was common. Pretending to be weak at market. And this is very common. So if I find out that my would-be master owns a sugarcane plantation, I don't want to go to a sugarcane plantation because of the rigor of the day. All plantations are horrible, but the sugar plantation, you're in, New Orleans humidity for 14 hours a day working. So at auction, I'm going to pretend that my leg hurts, my foot is broken. There are even some slaves pretending to be special needs, like they couldn't understand or grasp. Self-mutilation to make your value go down. People would chop off fingers. Self-abortions if they find out that they're having a child. I don't want to bring a child into a world where this person is going to be a slave for the rest of their life. And then finally, suicide was a very common thing for Africans to do, even, en route to the Americas.
Yeah. Today in our lives, why do we all shy away from the history of slave revolt? People don't like to talk about it. The minute you begin to raise that, they think you are an extremist. You're trying to put division among people. Why do we all shy? This is pure truth. But mostly we shy away from this kind of truth. Why is it so?
Well, I find it as a historian, sometimes truth is difficult to swallow. People want to have history basically reaffirm the things that they think happened, or they want to feel good. And, knowing that people went through this level of oppression and just terrible situation in this country does make people uncomfortable. But the point is, we need to know about it if it happens, so that we, God knows we don't want to repeat history. Right. But at the same time, we have to really look at slave resistance and slave revolts to know that that notion of the happy slave was a fake narrative, or slavery was a choice. Black people were just sitting there, twiddling their thumbs. They chose to be slaves. No one chooses to be enslaved, and the other part is, if you chose slavery, why was there a slave revolt? And again, I'm not even showing you all the slave revolts that happened. This is just an appetizer. Why was there like a slave revolt? And these are serious revolts so frequently if people were happy being enslaved. They even said that Africans that ran away or revolted against their masters had some type of mental disorder. That was in science books, because Black people by nature like being enslaved. That would be in a science book. But we have empirical evidence here that says no, no one was choosing slavery. Even in a time period where Africans are only making up about 13 or 15% of the population, with no guns, no weapons, and no ability to really efficiently fight against the chains of their oppression, they're still rebelling. So that tells you all you need to know. I'm willing to die if it means that I rebel against the chains of my oppression. So to me, that doesn't sound like they're choosing slavery.
Wow. So just look at this lengthy list.
Mm-hmm.
This is so touching. But you see, you realize that most of this slave revolt failed.
Mm-hmm.
Why did it fail?
Well, there's a lot of reasons why the slave revolts failed. One of the main reasons, of course, is that numbers, contrary to popular opinion from those people who don't believe in reading and studying, the numbers were not on African side.
Okay.
Okay, again, 13 or 14% of the population against 80 something percent of the population with guns is a recipe for disaster when you're rebelling. But also, unfortunately, you had a number of slaves that at the last minute ran and told their master what was being planned. In
Snitches.
other words, snitches, right? Today we call them snitches. And,
Snitches.
and we always try to unpack this as historians, like, why on earth would someone do this? But it was really a common cause for a lot of rebellions that failed. Stono's rebellion, which was probably one of the most noted ones, and during the 18th century, this happened, and this is all over politics, by the way.
Okay.
So there was an Angolan man by the name of Jemmy, and he's going to organize a group of enslaved Africans to rebel against the British because he got word that the Spanish, who, by the way, the Spanish are in Florida at this time, Florida Spanish, they said, Black people, run away from your plantations, come down to Florida, convert to Catholicism. We will set you free. You got to learn how to speak Spanish, and we will give you land. Well, the Spanish fulfilled that promise for a lot of Black folks, but they didn't do it because they loved Black people. They wanted to hurt the British. So this was all political.
Oh.
Yeah. So the Stono's Rebellion, this is the group of slaves that didn't make it safely to Spanish Florida, coming out of South Carolina.
Okay.
And one of the reasons why, of course, because there were quote unquote snitches in the mix. In addition to that, Native Americans also turned on these African Americans and told the white planters what was going on. And ultimately, most of the participants were killed. The survivors were sold to the West Indies. So
Let me, sometimes, we far away from how were they able to communicate? How were they able to get these informations that other slave plantations have got freedom? I mean, today we have the cell phones. You can Google. But in those days, if there was even no radio, how were they communicating? How were they gathering intelligence? No, how did even information get even into the camp? Because if I'm a slave master and I have a whole plantation, I'll make sure no information from outside gets into the plantation. But look
absolutely, the Native Americans were instrumental in spreading this information to the enslaved Africans. So there were Native Americans that did, in fact, aid Africans in attempting to escape because this is their land. They know their land. They know where to go. They know where to run. They know where to hide. Africans had no knowledge of continental North America. Those who had been enslaved and brought in. But nevertheless, a lot of times it would come via Native Americans or, Africans who, by the way, initially couldn't communicate with one another, would learn each other's language. Now, they weren't supposed to be speaking Native African tongues. They could get in trouble for that, but they would do it, undercover in a way, because Africans, even today, it's very rare to find an African that only speaks one language. Most Africans are able to pick up language very quickly, which is why even the Spanish, when they came to colonize the Americas, would always travel with Black men or, African men, because they knew Africans had the ability to learn indigenous languages very quickly.
Oh, I see. Back to the same question, I think that's the revolt in Haiti.
Yes.
Revolt took place in Haiti. But look at the distance from Haiti to Virginia or to the Americans. People in the plantations were able to get the information that Haiti managed to get their independence. How did the information get out there?
It got out there because Black sailors like to talk a lot. And of course,
we do a lot.
Black sailors were talking and they were, as we say today, spilling the tea, right?
Yeah.
So A lot of plantation owners, the last thing they wanted to their slaves to find out about was the fact that the Haitian Revolution was a success. But when you have black men on boats traveling up and down the Eastern Corridor, every chance they get, did you hear about what they did down there in the Caribbean? So they started spreading this information to black sailors. And once Africans here in the United States got wind of it, they're like, well, if it worked down there, in the islands, maybe it could work for us too. So that is why the Haitian Revolution, I know people are probably saying, wait a minute, I thought this was a North American presentation. It is, but the Haitian Revolution rocked the nation, okay? Largely because this is the first time enslaved Africans on a sugar plantation, in a sugar colony, Saint Domingue, okay, this is French territory, were able to rise up, kill their masters, and take over the island of Hispaniola, which today is present day Haiti on one side, and of course, the Dominican Republic on the other side. And they won their independence from Haiti because of resistance, because of a slave insurrection. And they became the first Black republic.
Right.
In addition to that, they're going to rename the island from Saint Domingue to Haiti because that is the name that the Taino inhabitants, which are the indigenous people, Native Americans, called it before the Europeans came in. But this is going to lead to an increase in slave revolts here in the United States, but it's also going to lead to stricter slave codes.
Right.
So now more than 10 Black people can't be seen caught talking together because y'all are planning something. What are you planning?
Right.
But the other reason why I like to highlight the Haitian Revolution when I'm doing U.S. history is because the Haitian Revolution made way for the Louisiana Purchase, which allowed the United States to expand west. Okay, again, and by the way, this is Toussaint Louverture. He was the leader of the Haitian Revolution. He is the son of an African prince from Benin. So again, you have that royal blood in you. You hear stories from your dad about how you were in power. It's hard for you to accept your status as a slave.
Right. There is some few text messages coming, Doctor. I just wanted to hold on for some few minutes. Serious
Sure.
text messages. Tiffany Osei says, "Hi, Tash," and then Tiffany also says that were the Morons in the U.S. That's a question from Tiffany, and then Carlos Caloni also asked a question. He said, "Seriously." Seriously, the new colonialism on the African continent, considering the current rate of brain drain." Okay, all right. And then I think he also said, Dr. Wilson, thank you so much for this in depth account. We should have a lot of this. Yeah, that was from Kalani. Okay, so
Okay.
if you answer Tiffany's question, were there Morons in the US?
Yes, there were maroon communities in the United States. Most of them were in the area of Louisiana. So you did have a large maroon community there, a little bit maybe in Georgia, but mostly in Louisiana. And a lot of times they would work out deals with local authorities, but also you're in a situation where you have populations that are majority Black. So Louisiana and a lot of those states, the cotton states, and of course Louisiana was a sugarcane, primarily sugarcane territory, did in fact have maroon communities. So the answer is yes.
All right. I think we have Shasha Mali from Ghana who's also watching this program live. Shasha, big ups to you. All right. Doc, you can proceed. There are a lot of test questions, but we will take the test questions later.
Oh, sure.
Yes. Yeah.
So I was talking about the Louisiana Purchase, and I want to just make it very clear what we're talking about. When I say Louisiana Purchase, I'm not just talking about the state of Louisiana as we know it today. Look at this amount of territory that the United States gained as a result of the Haitian Revolution. Now, you may say, how did they gain it? Well, here's the thing. After France was unable to, as they said, you can't even keep your Negroes in check in the Caribbean. How are you going to erect a French empire here in the Atlantic world? So basically, as a result of being overthrown by enslaved Africans, they were laughed off the stage here in the Atlantic world. So of course they still had territory in Canada and islands in the Caribbean. But in terms of their hold on the center of the continent of the North American continent, they were done. So they sold this land to the United States for $15 million. So the United States' western expansion in 1803 was made largely in part because of the Haitian Revolution.
$15 million.
Hmm. That's a lot of land. Look at this.
Wow.
Yeah, and you see, Spain is still out west. So you still have Spanish territory here. And then, as I said before, Spain is still in Florida. But that's going to change very soon because the United States is going to start pushing people out so that they can, extend from shore to shores, or as they called it, manifest destiny. So with the Louisiana Purchase, as you can imagine, comes more slavery, comes more intense slavery. And also, once word gets out, those black sailors just kept talking and talking about how they overthrew in the Caribbean. Other people are getting ideas and inspiration, and one such example includes an enslaved man named Gabriel Prosser. Okay, Gabriel was in Virginia. In 1800, a large group worked with Gabriel to put together this rebellion. Okay, he was 24 years old. He could read, which was something that was illegal during this time. African Americans who were enslaved were not allowed to read and write unless it was related to, in some places, if you were reading the Bible, they let you do that, but that was pretty much it. He was also a blacksmith. So he's saying, all right, we need to plan a revolt. The revolt was planned for August 30th. There was a terrible, terrible storm. Okay. Torrential downpours, all this other stuff. So he said, we're going to hold off and postpone it. We'll do it tomorrow.
Oh, Lord.
Well, before they could even get up and running the next day, two slaves ran to their masters and told detail for detail what they were planning. So participants were either killed or sold off. Of course, Gabriel was killed because he was the leader. But again, as I said before, most slave revolts are going to fail because of snitches, unfortunately. Another example of that will come in South Carolina in 1822. A young man by the name of Denmark Vesey. He's going to plot a slave revolt, okay? His story is very interesting to me. First of all, he was a member of the AME Church, African Methodist Episcopal Church, down in South Carolina. And that really became a hub for a lot of people who wanted to end slavery.
Started in
And that,
Philadelphia here, right? Sorry, I'm saying the church started in Philadelphia here.
yes, it did. Yes, it started in Philadelphia. But it spread very quickly, Baltimore and then, down the Eastern Corridor. So he actually won his freedom because he won the lottery. So he used the money he won in the lottery to buy himself.
Oh,
Yeah. So he hooked up with this guy by the name of Gullah Jack, who was an African conjurer. Today we say witch doctor or, putting spiritual roots on people or whatever. So they planned this revolt. Unfortunately, before they could do what they were about to do, two slaves informed whites of their plans. Now that led to their execution as well. Yep.
this snitches again.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's even to today. We still have snitches among us.
Yeah, I mean, and it's unfortunate because again, look at how many people were involved in this. 9,000 people in South Carolina. This
Wow.
could have actually worked, locally. But again, if people have information before it's about to happen, then unfortunately that's why, these things are put down even before they get up and running. So really the vetting process of involving certain slaves in these revolts is going to be even more strict as time goes on. One such example includes a few revolts where they did not want biracial, or as they call them, mulatto slaves, those slaves who were of mixed heritage, to be involved because they felt as though they were going to run and tell their masters what's going on, because there were some mulattoes, not all, that took the position that although I am a product of sexual violence, although my white father doesn't claim me, I still don't want him to die. maybe if I go and tell him what's planned, there'll be an ounce of love that he'll have for me. But, you know, unfortunately, that typically didn't happen. But then you had some mulatto slaves saying, I want to kill him myself. All the things that he did to my mother, all the things he's doing, you know, so it was a mixed bag with, you know, mulatto slaves at the time. But nevertheless, um, failure of these slave revolts typically would go back to the same common cause, which of course is snitching, as we call it.
Right.
So this slave revolt is probably one of the ones that we hear about the most, you know, growing up in
Man,
school.
the one who said God called him to slave some to free some slave. Tell me much about it.
Yeah, so Nat Turner's rebellion. This is the one that typically, if anything, this is what we learn about in American schools as it relates to slave revolts. You know, and for a long time before, you know, my mom opened my eyes and I went to college, I thought this was it, like Nat Turner's rebellion, and that was pretty much it in terms of rebellions. Well, I was wrong. But nevertheless, Nat Turner was a slave preacher from Virginia. He was literate. His master's wife taught him how to read the Bible. And he's going to organize a mass rebellion because he said he heard the voice of God. And then also, when he heard the voice of God, there was a solar eclipse in the sky. And he thought that was God's way of telling him, it is your responsibility to deliver your people from slavery. So he's going to start off, of course, by killing his master's family. And then he went on a 24-hour killing spree of whites. They went from plantation to plantation. And again, inspired also by David Walker. David Walker was a free black man. He wrote an appeal in 1829 that encouraged blacks to rise up and kill their masters. And we still use this rhetoric today: kill or be killed by any means necessary to gain your freedom. These are the words of David Walker in 1829, but typically we attribute them to the Black Panther Party of the 1960s. But David Walker said this in 1829. But again, this rebellion with Nat Turner is really going to scare everyone, of course. You'll see stricter slave codes, which are the laws that govern slave activities, passed in 1831. And also, again, they put him to death because they did not bury him because they didn't want his burial site to become like this place of inspiration for people to, you know, rebel again. But between David Walker's militancy and Nat Turner's rebellion, you're going to see resistance during this time pretty much get on steroids, and it's not going to stop until slavery ends legally in this country.
Is it the same thing they did with Malcolm X? Because it looks like the grave of Malcolm X, nobody even talks about it. Nobody even goes there to look at it. Same thing.
Right. And I mean, the rhetoric that Malcolm was using, the rhetoric that even Robert F. Williams, who was an inspiration to the Black Panthers and Malcolm, and even, Garvey, right? This is the language that they're using as well. But, you know, David Walker's came in 1829, and what he would do is have it publicly read because he knew that slaves could not read because they were not allowed to. So he would have it publicly read. Before various crowds to encourage people to rise up, because his whole thing was you cannot have a peaceful revolution. It's not natural to have revolution that doesn't entail some level of violence. And that's the same thing that you hear some of the Black Power folks, you know, from that era, some of those activists say too. But this is where they're getting their inspiration. 1831 was also a great year because you're going to see the Underground Railroad start. Now, it was going on before then, but this is when it's really going to lock in and be almost like a well-oiled machine.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So timing and the Underground Railroad, the timing was, I think it was the same.
Mm-hmm. Right, because again, people are angry. People want it to end. People are tired of slavery, and anti-slavery societies are pretty much commonplace in most cities during this time, especially Philadelphia, Boston, Baltimore, New York. You're going to see a lot of anti-slavery societies in those places. And this started off as a network of anti-slavery activists. By the way, again, Underground Railroad is not a literal thing. Like, there was no train. Although people did, in fact, use trains to travel through various checkpoints to get out of slavery, because there is a connection between the Underground Railroad and the actual railroads, but this is really just a symbol. And one of the things that it did was it intensified resentment of the North for slaveholders because they say, you're still in our property. I showed you the prices. So if you have 10 guys run away on the Underground Railroad, you had a lot of angry masters at that time. And most operations are going to take place at night. People are taking supplies and disguising themselves. Women would break into their mistress, which is the master's wife's closet, to steal outfits. Those slaves that could pass for white, because remember, we're in a society where a lot of slave children are being conceived through sexual violence. And if your enslaver is your dad, chances are you could pass for white in some cases. You had men dressing like women, women dressing like men. People were doing whatever they could to get out of slavery.
Right. I see.
Philadelphia is going to be a major hub for the Underground Railroad because, again, at this particular point, Philly is a black free place, large free black population, and you can have somewhat of a semblance of a life in Philadelphia as a free black person. Now, of course, you were never fully safe because there were also instances of free black people in Philadelphia being kidnapped by slave catchers and sold south, people that were never slaves ever. But during this time, stations, which were people's homes, are going to be used.
Right.
But all lines lead to free states. And my main place that I want to go, if I'm not going to Philly, is to Canada. And the reason why I want to go to Canada, the reason why Canada was heaven to a runaway slave, is because fugitive slave laws were not honored in Canada. Whereas in Philadelphia, if I'm a master from Maryland, I can go up to Philly and get my slave back because that's what the law says. But Canada, I can't cross into Canada and get my slave back. So most people prefer to go to Canada versus Philadelphia or Boston. Boston was also a very popular place for free black people. And William Still out of Philadelphia is seen as the father of the Underground Railroad. And he helped about 800 plus slaves escape. We don't have an exact number because this is an illegal activity. And I always tell people that when, why don't they know the exact number? Well, if someone's stealing cars, are they going to write down every time they steal a car?
Right.
This is illegal. So William Still was very important to the movement.
Yeah. It looks like he put down detailed information of all the personalities that he was able to help. And
Yeah.
was it with the reason that maybe they might reunite again as a family?
Hmm.
Yes, okay, right. But
Absolutely.
did we have any white folks trying to help black folks to free from their colonial masters? I mean,
Yes, we did. And the thing is, and I always tell people this,
yes,
the Underground Railroad probably, and I would say probably because it's a hypothetical, probably would not have worked without white participation, largely from the Quaker community.
yeah,
The Quakers, as you know, a very, very huge community in Philadelphia and Pennsylvania. William Penn is the founder of Penn's Woods or Pennsylvania, which is what Pennsylvania means.
yes,
And he was a Quaker. Over time, although Quakers did own slaves in the beginning, as time goes on, the Quaker Church is going to take a position that we will not tolerate slavery. If you own slaves, you're going to burn in hell. And for that reason, they're going to take a very active role in the Underground Railroad and a lot of these anti slavery societies. So, yes, the answer is yes, there was white participation. There was coded language that the Quakers would use. If you were talking to someone and you were talking about the cargo that is coming, I would say, I have 10 pieces of cargo coming from Virginia. And they'll be brought by a friend of a friend. And the person would say, okay, now to me and you, we're like, what are they talking about? Cargo means people, enslaved African Americans, and a friend of a friend is a Quaker in most cases.
right.
Even today, friends meeting houses all throughout Pennsylvania, you see Abington Friends, Germantown Friends. When you see friends, they're talking about the Quaker meeting places. So
Is it true that people were even mail themselves in boxes? I mean, give me
people were
a
doing
illustration of
everything. Absolutely. I mean, look, and again, look at this. The goal is for me to get out of slavery, right? People were mailing themselves. People were hiding away in cupboards. It was in covered wagons, everything. Any and all tricks. There were even pregnant women mailing themselves. You know, you
No,
get water and
now
crackers and
in
biscuits.
Africa, I know a lot of people are hearing this from Africa.
Hmm.
If you say people are mailing themselves,
Yes.
what do you mean by that?
That means they're putting themselves in boxes, having a friend seal them up,
Yeah.
and saying, mail me from Virginia or mail me from North Carolina to the abolitionists in Philadelphia.
God.
So you're basically, for our purposes, you're FedExing yourself or UPSing yourself or sending yourself on Amazon through Amazon to a free place because you just can't take it anymore.
Yeah. Freedom.
Um,
They want
yeah,
freedom.
freedom was worth it for people, and people always say, "Well, how did they do this?" People were willing to try, even if it meant they died in the process. So a lot of people were mailing themselves. But once word got out, and I'll explain that in a minute, that people were mailing themselves, that's when they're going to start cracking down on inspecting freight packages. Okay. um, Probably one of the most legendary and iconic individuals who worked for the Underground Railroad was Harriet Tubman.
Right.
Now, she was an interesting figure because Harriet was just, you know, I don't know how else to. This woman was called by God. I don't know how else to explain it. She was never caught. She knew how to do so many things. She was a cook. She was a nurse. She was a spy. She traveled north 14 times, bringing families and other slaves to freedom. Even after the passage of fugitive slave laws, she's taking slaves to Canada. She typically pick you up on a Saturday night
Mm.
because that's when the overseer is getting drunk. And on Sunday, we don't work in the fields on Sunday because of blue laws, which means that's the Lord's day. Slaves don't work on Sunday. So by the time they know that you're missing is Monday morning at 6, 7 a.m. when you're supposed to be out there picking whatever you're picking. So she already has a day and a half start on people before they even know you're gone. And she would carry a pistol on her hip, not just for protection from what would be slave catchers, but also to those slaves who, again, at the last minute decide, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to do it. She would say, all right, well, I'm going to have to kill you. Because if I let you go back to your master's house, you're going to tell them all my secrets. You're going to tell them about that white man who's a Quaker, but nobody knows he's a Quaker. You're going to tell them about all our hiding places and all of our methods. So either you're going to die free in Canada as an old person, or you die here. And most people opted for Philly or Canada, obviously. So, I
Do
mean, I
you know
would.
whether she really killed somebody? Do we know? Is it in the records that she pointed a gun on somebody and then took somebody's life?
We have no evidence that she ever had to use a pistol once she made that explanation to her cargo. We have no evidence that she ever killed anyone, but that threat was absolutely there to them because it compromises the whole operation. If you go back, we talked about snitches, right?
Yeah.
If you go back, you're going to know all the things, all our coded language if you go back, because they're going to beat it out of you if you don't tell them anyway. So yeah, Harriet Tubman, and then during the Civil War, she was training black men on how to shoot a gun. She taught them how to shoot, because she had a really clean shot, and she was known for having a clean shot. So she was training soldiers on how to shoot
How tall was
weapons.
she? What was her height? How tough was she?
Hmm. Well, was a little lady. She was about 4'11". But again, small and mighty. I always say about Harriet, small and mighty. And again, she was never caught. And even after slavery, she was involved in the women's suffrage movement for African American women, because she died in 1913. So even when I'm teaching my classes and we're talking about 1905 women's right, my class like, is this the same Harriet Tubman from slavery? I'm like, yes, this is the same Harriet Tubman. She was an activist until the day she died.
Doc, well, we know time is fast spent, and
Sure.
um, um, give me three additional points just to wrap up, and then, God willing, I mean, people say that
Mhm.
Black History Month is between what, 1st February to March, but to me, Black History Month is every day.
Every day.
Yeah, we must have a part two of this show. But I want you to give me three strong points, and then we'll call it a day. And then I will
Mhm.
arrange with your office, and then have you back on the show. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I will. One of the points that I would like to stress is the fact that, again, people were doing all kinds of things to get out of slavery because Black resistance was important to survival for a lot of people. They no longer wanted to be trapped in situations where, one, they're not even seen as human. So it's unnatural to think that someone wouldn't rebel against that system. And again, like we talked about, people mailing themselves, you had people pretending to be white who weren't white, like Ellen Craft pretended to be her slave master and her husband pretended to be her slave so that they can escape to Philadelphia. So she disguised herself as a white man and her husband was a slave. And of course, husbands don't like this story a lot. So like, oh,
I
the
can just
husband is a
imagine.
slave.
I
But
mean, slave in Sharita.
but again, this is what people did to get out of it. And also again, the slave revolts. We talked about the Amistad, remember? Taking over the boat because Africans did not want to accept the fact that they were being taken into bondage. The Creole, another slave ship that was very instrumental in terms of freeing people. 135 slaves were on that boat. 128 gained access to freedom. There were 7 who were afraid to get off the boat, and they were ultimately sold at auction. But one of the things that I also want to press upon us today as we have this conversation is that there was never a time in our history here where Africans chose to be enslaved, where Africans chose the chains of their oppression. Black resistance was as commonplace as breathing. And for that reason, the notion of the happy slave singing zippity doo dah and playing with people in the field is a narrative that was constructed to justify enslaving people who should not have been enslaved.
Right.
Mhm.
So this is deep and powerful. But I would like you to touch on Frederick Douglass
Oh,
before you sign
absolutely.
out. Before you sign out. Without Frederick Douglass, I'm not going to permit you to sign out. Tell me something small about Frederick Douglass before you sign out.
Oh, absolutely. So Frederick Douglass actually ran away as well. He was a runaway slave, dressed up like a sailor, and he made fake freedom papers because he was also literate. And he wrote his narrative talking about the horrors of slavery, which really resonated with people. Because it's one thing for you to say slavery is bad, because, I mean, but for him to give you details of his life, and also to be a good public speaker, which is something that people, African American people, were never really, people didn't believe people were African Americans were capable of good public speaking or writing. So he used his position as an agent and as a public speaker to talk about the horrors of slavery, but also was an active member of the abolitionist movement. And he was also brought into the White House by Abraham Lincoln on several occasions to talk about the Black agenda, which is what we call it today. What does Black America need and why? And that is why he is regarded as one of the most important Black American leaders of the 19th century, because of his influence over government and also his ability to organize and also, as we say, agitate. That was his phrase: agitate, agitate, agitate. Don't accept the chains of your oppression. You can't.
Yeah, there is a text message. Bran Halabunton. A lot of symbols leading to safe passage on the underground railroad networks were hidden in plain sight,
Mm-hmm.
as the Sankofa symbol in ironworks.
Mm-hmm.
Would you
Absolutely. There
elaborate
are
on that?
absolutely there were places that would have symbols. There were places that spoke in coded language, and again, that was very, very commonplace on the Underground Railroad because unless you're a part of the network, you have no idea what that is. And there are a lot of sites that have been registered as official Underground Railroad sites, and including Cheney University, which is in Pennsylvania. And like Cheney was a yes, Cheney was a site on the Underground Railroad because at that particular point it was a college that was up and running for African American students. So
There is another text message here coming from Bridge 250. How many more revolts took place after the Civil War when slavery was outlawed? But
well, there were revolts in other places in terms of the Caribbean and also South America, because remember, Brazilian slavery didn't end until 1888.
oh,
So there were tons and tons of slave revolts that happened throughout Latin America because a lot of the Latin American countries ended slavery after the United States abolished slavery in 1865. But there were also uprisings after 1865, but most of them were related to a denial of Black voting rights because they were trying to prevent Black men from voting.
Oh,
So there were uprisings related to that as well.
there is another text message. This is coming from Carlos A. Coloni. How serious is Negro colonization? How serious is Negroes colonialism on the African continent, considering the current rate of brain drain?
Right. Well, I think a lot of people they feel that this is a very taxing topic. People don't want to talk about it because it is a heavy subject. But at the same time, I'd like to always remind people that you should never let anyone bully you out of talking about your history or acknowledging your history. And that goes for everybody, regardless of what your background is. Because the moment you do that, you allow people to de emphasize your historical footprint and your historical voice. So I understand, having fatigue over this information and colonialization, which is something that arguably still is going on now. But at the same time, we have to put light on this topic if we're ever going to really have an honest conversation about what happened. You have to talk about it.
Right.
Mhm.
I would also like to say that Shashamali, he sent a text message. He's watching live from Ghana.
Mhm.
Shashamali was part of the team last year when we had Black History Month.
Mhm.
He ended the whole episode with a live music coming from Ghana Street, and we had to beam it live over here. But Doctor, I would just want to say thank you so much, and God bless you, and continue to go deep and reveal some of these hidden truths unto us. I will pray that just as you've been doing and you are still doing and you have just done, God should continue to open doors for you in churches and in schools and having seminar and then having discussion and then teaching the young ones and some of us, because some of these truths needs to be said not
Mhm.
only in America but in other continents like Africa, etc.,
Mhm.
etc. Because as long as you're black, as long as you are light, but you are still black, you are an African.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, as we celebrate Black History Month, let us all remember that the fight for justice is going on. The Black resistance movement is still alive and well, and it is continuing to inspire new generations of activists to fight for equal justice and freedom for all. The word here is freedom for all. So let us all take a moment in our homes, in our cars, silent on this contribution of this Black resistance movement. Let us commit ourselves and to continue to fight for a better future.
Mhm.
God bless you all. My name is Martin Pettigo, and I'm streaming live from Pennsylvania. And our special guest who's taking us through detail. And I know she's going to come over here again. Doctor, I know Sherida is going to reach out to you and your office so that we can have you back on this show, so that you will continue with this because we need this. We need this. Uh,
Absolutely.
Thank you. God bless you. And then, my greetings to your son, Kumasi. Hey,
Thank
Felix,
you.
Ghana. She's been to Ghana. She loved Asante region and she named her firstborn,
Second born.
secondborn,
Mhm.
Kumasi. You know, Kumasi, we are full of resilience. We will resist oppressors' rule. God bless you. And ladies and gentlemen, the song in the background is coming from a gentleman who is a native of Benin. He is in Belgium right now, and this is his gift for this program. The song hasn't even come out yet, but I said, Martin, I won't like you to use this song to Christmas this program. It's called the Masterclass.
Wasamado Monikele Kabumo Wanala Baby Wasamado Only the cabin will one eye. Again Wasamado Monikele Kabumo Wanala Baby was on ale produire acier menenya shisala shiye wotona de tai mozama do ponike le tebe mwana la mozama do ponike le tebe mwana.
So, Doctor, I'll be calling you behind the curtain, and then I'll call you, right?
Okay. Thank you.
Mozama do ponike le tebe mwana la mozama do ponike le tebe mwana. Ben mozama do ponike le tebe mwana la mozama do ponike le tebe mwana. Ale produire acier amenenya shisala ushiye wotona de tai mozamando ponike le tebe mwana la mozamando ponike le tebe mwana. Yovo mutu ajode ba joye kwenye dagonia Afrika nusa ashiye twenye dagbea Yovo mutu ajode ba joye kwenye dagonia Afrika nusa ashiye twenye dagbea Nuozama do Oni le tebe nuwe wonai Bebe nuozama do Oni ke le tebe nuwe wona la gbemi Nuozama do Oni ke le tebe nuwe wonai